everyone, Justin Adkins here for Creative Scrapbooker Magazine, and I'm so excited to be here with you today showing off an A2 size card that I will be creating using some fun Pink and Main products. First, I've grabbed my Smile Crocodile set and I'm showing you a couple images that I'll be using on the card that we're creating today. Whenever I start creating, I always like to start with my coloring first. So I'm going to grab the images that I'll be using for today's card, like this cute little underwater crocodile, and I'm going to use my Misty to stamp it down with some Blackout Ink by Ink on 3. It's my go-to marker for any sort of Copic alcohol marker coloring. Next, what I'm going to do is stamp out the little seafloor items I'm going to be using as well, using that same Blackout ink. And usually when I stamp, I like to stamp it twice to make sure that I'm getting a great impression. Now I've sped up my marker coloring, but as you can see, I'm going in with some yellow greens when I'm coloring my crocodile, starting with the YG67, going on to YG17, and then using some of the lightest colors of the YG0 family. I like to do this because this lets me get a really nice sort of vibrancy to my crocodile without it being too bright. So as you can see, I lay down my color once and then I actually go back in and I repeat the color once again. This is because when you put the ink down on the paper, it's nice and saturated, and then when you put that color on top of it again, it makes it really easy for it to blend to get those nice alcohol marker blends that we all go for. So I'm finishing up with my markers. I'm coloring every bit of my crocodile. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do next is move on to my orange elements, like his little snorkel mask, along with those little fish images as well. So I'm going ahead, repeating the same process of coloring them twice to get a really nice blend and saturation of the image. Next, I'm using my BGs to color my snorkel mask and my bubbles. I'm just doing one pass through because they're smaller areas and I don't need this area very saturated. Now I'm going to work on my two little areas of barnacles and seaweed, coloring up the ground first, and then after we work on the ground, we're going to use some RVs for the barnacles, and this is going to give them a really nice bright color. I'm also using that on the inside of the snout for my crocodile as well. I like to pull in colors elsewhere. For the last item, we're going to be coloring up the little bits of seaweed with some green Copic markers that are going to give that really nice green, slightly bluish effect with the colors I'm using. One thing I love about Pink and Main stamps is they always have amazing coordinating dies for all of the images. So I'm going to go ahead and use the coordinating dies for each of the images I colored out. And as you can see, I'm using some low tack pixie tape to go ahead and tack the dies onto my paper. I like to use smaller pieces and I try to do my best not to put the tape directly on top of the image, just in the off event that I put too much pressure and it sticks to the colored up portion of my image. So as you can see, I've processed it through and I've got all of my images all ready to go. We've got our crocodile, we've got our seaweed, barnacles, and our little fish. So I'm also going to use some white gel pen to add a little bit of an accent to my mask, and this should be good to be set aside for later. Now I did reach into my stash and pull out a retired stencil. This is the Masket Rectangle Stencil by Pink and Main. It's no longer available on the website, but there are a lot of ways that you can make your own stencil by die cutting a rectangle from some cardstock, or you may even have another stencil in your stash to use for this as well. Once again, I'm going in with my pixie tape just to go ahead and adhere my card base to my stencil. Now I do like to go ahead and add the pixie tape to all four sides of my blending cardstock just to make sure that it's not going to move around when I am ink blending over top. So I've gone ahead and grabbed some Salvage Patina Distress Ink, and this is going to be the bulk of my layer. I'm just using a foam blending tool to get that nice and blended up onto my cardstock. I like to also dab off the excess before I apply it to the paper, just so I don't get any sort of smudged areas that are heavily inked. So I'm going ahead making sure everything is as nice as I want it to be before I move on to my peacock feathers. And this is a lighter layer. As you can see, I'm blending from the top down. I will be going ahead and flipping this so the darker area will be on the bottom. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is spritz some water on the layer and then go ahead and use a microfiber cloth just to dab it up for a little bit of bleach spots. Now, using the Sunshine Layer Stencil, I'm going to spray it with some Pixie Spray just to give myself a little bit of tack for my stenciling that I'll be getting into in a second. So I still have my Mask It rectangle on top, and then I picked one of the layers of the Sunshine layers to use on top of the mask. I kind of fidget with it a little bit just to make sure it's all lined up the way that I want it to be. And that is what I love about using Pixie Spray, is that it is a repositionable adhesive. It's not permanent, so I'm able to kind of pick up and fuss around with it just a little bit to make sure that I get my stencil exactly where I want it to be. Now, once I have my stencil exactly into place, I go ahead and I reach for my salvaged patina Distress Oxide ink. I'm using Distress Oxide because it blends a little bit more lightly than the Distress ink, and I'm going with the grain of my Sunshine layers just so I don't have any sort of disruption with my stenciling. As you're going to see with the reveal, because the Distress Oxide is a little bit lighter, I get some really fun ray effects that lay on top of the ink that I've already blended. Now I've gone ahead and grabbed my Stitch Rectangles Set 1 set. I'm going to go ahead and use the second largest die in this set and put it onto this panel so I can die cut a nice stitched rectangle. Now the reason I ink blended first was because I wanted to be able to give myself a little bit of leniency in case it was off-centered and I had to correct it. So die cutting last allowed me to do any necessary corrections to make sure that ink blended area is right in the center where I want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to process it through my die cutter, and then I'm going to have a wonderful stitched rectangle that's going to be the perfect layer for my project. I wanted to incorporate some pattern paper as well, so I've grabbed the Garden 6x6 paper pack by Pink and Main, and I'll be using this white and blue-green wonky plaid pattern that's included, and this is just going to be so perfect for the personality of my card. Now I've gone ahead and grabbed the largest of my Stitched Rectangles Set 1 dies, and I'm using some pixie tape once again to go ahead and tack it down to my pattern paper, and I've gone ahead and processed it through my die cutting machine again. Now this largest die is perfectly A2 size, so this is going to fit wonderfully on my card base. Now you're going to see how these two layers work on top of each other, and I start to plan out where I want my images to go. I'm sort of messing around with where I want that crocodile along with the little barnacle seaweed and the fish as well. So I'm getting a little bit of an idea where I'm going to go with this before I move on to my next step. I'm going to use some Riverwalk cardstock by Pink and Main for a heat embossed sentiment. So once again, I've grabbed my Misty and I'm going to use this to get everything into place. I grabbed my Smile Crocodile stamp set and I've gone ahead and selected the sentiment that says, "Oh snap." I just think it's funny. I love a good pun when it comes to my cards as well. So I go ahead, I put this into place, of course, because it's still slightly sticky just due to the stamp material. I gotta fidget with it a little bit, but once it's onto my paper, I go ahead and pick it up, and then I go ahead and I use the Pink and Main anti-static brush to go ahead and brush onto my paper. And what's great about this is going to make my heat embossing as perfect as possible because I'm not going to have any straggling pieces of embossing powder. So I've used the Pink and Main embossing ink to go ahead and press down my sentiment to make sure it's nice and applied to my image. And then I'm going to be able to move on to my heat embossing. The Frosting Embossing Powder by Pink and Main, just pouring it on top of my stamped out sentiment, tapping off the excess, and it's already ready to go thanks to that magic anti-static brush. Using my heat gun, I'm just going to go ahead and set my sentiment, and then this is going to make it all good to go for the later portion of my card. Now grabbing some fine detail scissors, I'm going to go ahead and fussy cut the Oh Snap sentiment out. I really like to do this when I'm making my cards because I feel like it's a fun way to make your sentiments pop and it really gives them their own sort of custom shape. So I've gone ahead using my detail scissors, just kind of working it around, never fully closing the scissor, and I'm going to get a great cutout of this die. Now you can also use sentiment banners too. That would work great if you have them on hand. I just thought this would be a fun way to add a little extra personality to my card. I'm going to go ahead and grab that Peacock Feathers ink blender and using just the excess ink on it to blend the bottom of my sentiment, and then I'm going to go in with a microfiber cloth to clean off the embossing powder. Now what I'm going to do next is I've gone ahead and grabbed the Peacock Feathers Distress ink, and I'm going to go ahead and smush it down onto my glass mat and spritz it with a little bit of water. This is going to make it great to splatter on top of my background, and that's going to give a really fun extra detail to this panel. I also think splattering is a lot of fun when you are crafting water elements because of course water splatters, and I just think this is a great way to sort of exemplify that onto your card. I'll use my heat gun just to set the splattering, so I'm good to go for my next step. Now I did want to add an extra sentiment to my card, so I've grabbed my Smile Crocodile set and I've decided to add the sentiment "It's been a while," just because I thought it'd be fun to send this to a friend that maybe you haven't seen in a while. So I'm going to go ahead, put the sentiment into the lower right hand corner of my panel, pick it up with my Misty, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp it out with the Barbershop Premium Dye ink. Which is of course by Pink & Main. My apologies for my head being in the screen, but I wanted to make sure everything was nice and lined up, and I only have to stamp this down one time, which is wonderful. So now I'm able to start moving into the assembly portion of my card. Using Ultra Bond liquid adhesive, I'm going to go ahead and apply my white panel on top of my patterned paper panel, and then I'm actually going to pull in an oversized acrylic block in a moment, and this is something that I like to do to apply an even pressure and make sure everything is going to stick very nicely. Now I'm going to use some foam tape on the back of my little crocodile just so I can get some small strips that'll cover them nicely. Once they're put into place, I'll remove the backing and I will put my crocodile on the lower left-hand corner of my card. I'll also go back to some of that Ultra Bond adhesive with my little barnacles, and I will move back with some foam tape for my seaweed as well, using some very thin strips to adhere that to the lower right-hand portion of my card. Now I'm going to go ahead and use that little school of fish with the Ultra Bond adhesive, and I'm going to put that kind of in the upper center portion and finish out my adhesive with some foam tape on the back of my cutout Oh Snap sentiment. Now I'm grabbing the Floral Hearts glitter enamel dots because it's got a couple colors that are just going to work perfectly with my card, particularly this orange, also the lime green, and then also the aqua blue. So I'm going to use those three colors. I kind of like to mix and match between the different sizes and the different colors just to make sure to minimize any sort of repetitiveness with my card. Now, when I work with enamel dots or really any sort of embellishment, I try my best to follow the rule of threes by keeping my embellishments in groups of threes. Now, I break away from this rule a handful of times when I want a little extra embellishment. So you're going to see a little bit of that when I'm creating further with these enamel dots. And before I let them set, I kind of get a little wishy-washy on where I want them placed, so I'm able to kind of push them around and set them into the right spot. So here you see me moving them around. I love that they didn't fully set onto my image yet and didn't end up destroying anything on my card. Now for my very final step, I've got an A2 card base that's creased at the top, ready to go. I'm using my Ultra Bond adhesive, and then I will go ahead and place my main card panel right into place. And then what's wonderful about that liquid adhesive is it gives me a little extra time just to make sure everything is positioned exactly how I need it to be. And there you have it, my final card using the Smile Crocodile set by Pink & Main, along with a handful of other fun Pink & Main goodies. I hope you loved this tutorial as much as I loved making the card. Don't forget, for more crafting inspiration, to follow me on Instagram at JustANote by Justin, and I can't wait to share more inspiration with you in the future. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great day. Goodbye.